Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Doctors of Running podcast, where we, a group of doctors of physical therapy, discuss the art and science of running and the stuff that we put on our feet. Today, I'm hosting. My name's Nathan, and we have Dr. Matthew Klein, as well as two amazing guests that we've had on the show before, but now we're all in one space together. We have Andrea Paulson and Cory Hoffman from Saucony. They're here to help us talk about the development of PWRRUN HG, as well as the upcoming Kinvara Pro. And so we are so thrilled to have these people with us. We've gotten to know them pretty well, nerding out on footwear and science and production and all these different things. We have a very like mind when it comes to how we look at shoes, so it's always fun to get in the same room and talk about this. So Andrea and Cory, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, absolutely. We're pumped to have you. So before we have them introduce themselves a little bit further, a couple reminders. First, like I said, we've had them on the podcast before. So if you want to hear Andrea and Matt go into a conversation about materials and foam properties, you can check out episode number 95. And Cory was on talking about running economy as well as biomechanics stuff in episode 96. So you can go back and hear them talk about kind of those specific topics. And then today, again, we're going to get this deep dive into these materials. Before we do that, our subjective for the day, we just want to hear, because we have people from Saucony here with us, tell us what your favorite Saucony shoe is. So you can drop that in the comments below. And we're just curious to hear. They've come out, they produce a pretty large range of footwear. So curious to hear, as you can kind of tell from what the Kinvara is and what the Kinvara Pro is, there's a big range of the types of shoes being put out. So curious. So if you're listening on YouTube, you can comment below. Feel free to share what your favorite Saucony shoe is. So Andrea, could you just introduce yourself a little bit for us and for everybody who may not have heard your previous episode?
Yeah, for sure. I spent a lot of time last time talking about what I do. I think maybe this time I'll talk a little bit about who I am. But I lead the product engineering team and the human performance and innovation lab at Saucony. Product engineering covers everything from technical blueprints, CAD builds, management of molded parts, lasts, the R&D and innovation work around new midsole materials and manufacturing modernization. I said all of this last time. Same thing on human performance side. I'm going to let Cory dig a little deeper there, but it's the physical lab where we do all of the mechanical, biomechanical, and personal preference testing across all of our product. The way I like to explain it is that engineering creates and iterates, and then human performance investigates and then validates. But so more personally, I've been with Saucony almost 20 years now. So wow. It's not my first job out of school, but it is my first in the industry. My degree is in the exercise sciences, but I'd say my background is in product development and engineering. I actually started in product testing in the lab and then moved into development for about 10 years before I took over engineering and then eventually the lab as well. I think in the footwear industry, though, it's a place where a lot of talent has degrees or backgrounds in something unrelated to their job titles, which is great. I think it brings diversity and adds creative perspective. But I think I can think of a PLM that has a degree in history. That is not the case for the lab engineering teams. Mostly everyone has a targeted education in a similar field like kinesiology or ergonomics, movement science, biomedical engineering, mechanical engineering. It's fairly specialized. The reason I say all of this is I like to be really honest in these discussions. I do not have an MS. I don't have a PhD. I don't even have an MBA. You guys know I'm married to a DPT though, so that's probably good for like one transfer credit.
I like that.
Yeah. What I do have is 20 years of technical shoemaking experience, dozens of overseas manufacturing trips, and a whole heck of a lot of failed projects that never saw the light of day, and maybe a few that have done okay. So that's probably the best recap for my experience.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. And Cory, what about you?
I don't know how anyone can follow that, but for those of you who haven't listened to the last episode with me, my name is Cory Hoffman. I'm a performance engineer in the lab, working very closely with Andrea and the rest of the engineering team. My background is in biomedical engineering, where I studied at TCNJ, like one of your colleagues at the Doctors of Running. I studied biomechanics and mechanical engineering at Penn State. Sorry, Nate.
I forgot about that part. I forgot. Otherwise, we may not have had you back on.
I think that blindsided you last time. I'm not sure if you knew that about me, but it's okay.
Yeah, I didn't.
He was pretty stunned. Yeah.
So I didn't. I've been in the footwear industry now for 2 years, all at Saucony. Before that, I've had a couple of different roles in mostly kind of bridging the gap between engineering and research. I've worked for a commercial fitness equipment manufacturer for multiple different ones. And also I've worked for an engineering consulting group analyzing and investigating exoskeleton design and use for the Department of Defense. So I've had I've been very fortunate throughout my career to have a lot of interesting applications of the same kind of core fundamental scientific principles of biomechanics and engineering, just kind of applying them to different realms. Really, really fortunate to be where I am. Really love working on the team at Saucony, and really excited to be here to chat more about what we do.
Awesome. Well, again, we always record these on Sunday nights. Today is also Father's Day, which I know Father's Day means a lot of things to different people, whether if it's good or bad. I know it hits people in different ways. But either way, for y'all to give up a Sunday night on a day where people spend time together and with family, we're just thankful that you gave up that time to be with us. So excited to go into this conversation. And where we want to start is talking about a foam, talking about PWRRUN HG. So for those of you who haven't heard about PWRRUN HG before, where you saw it debuted was in their Saucony Endorphin Elite, which was a new kind of I'm always scared to say this in front of the people who created the shoe, like where we see it as this, like elite long distance racing shoe that's got a lot of stack underneath. It has a pretty aggressive rocker geometry that's different than the other models that we've seen from them, including the Endorphin Pro 2 and the Endorphin Pro 3. And so it's constructed a little bit different. It's got a very unique upper kind of, trying to minimize as much weight as possible through that upper while still keeping it secure. And then obviously the big part is the foam. So they have this new foam. It's called HG. And we just want to talk a little bit more about kind of where this foam came from. But maybe a place to start is just understanding kind of the history of the development of foam in general and what does research and development look like for that, just kind of that realm of things.
Yeah, I think I'd like to say first that the last couple of your episodes that have posted, they're going to dovetail really nicely into this conversation. At least I hope, right? So getting right into it, right? If you've heard me speak at all about product in the last 5 or 6 years, it's been my perspective that the future of the running industry lies entirely within polymer science and midsole cushioning technology. Last year I was on this podcast, we talked about superfoam, and I put those in quotations, right? And what it is, what quantifies it as such, and how prolific it could become. And I think you're starting to see that future arrive now. Every brand has that new and improved midsole technology, and that gap analysis between a super shoe's super foam and inline technology is closing. I think probably at an incredible rate. I'd add that. So I think for today we'll get into the weeds on PWRRUN HG, and it's in more detail about foam testing and R&D. But I think it, like you said, Nathan, it'd be helpful to know why. You might not care about PWRRUN HG. You might not care about the Endorphin Elite, the other 2 shoes that we released with that foam. It might not be the shoe for you. You might not even believe a word I have to say about all of these benefits and think it's all marketing BS. I swear it's not, but I understand your perspective there. But what you should care about is what it means for the industry. The work we do on these super shoes, again in quotations, super foams, the upfront costs, the research to make these pinnacle products is what often, and I'll say that again, often drives and encourages innovation downstream. But if you think about it, the EVA of today is super foam of the early 2000s. That's sort of a Cory quote.
Sure.
I'm going to steal it though. It's
I like it.
It's that much better. So, I'd be so bold to say what's undeniable about these foams. They're more, we'll call it protective. And I say this all the time. After a marathon, you see far fewer people hobbling down a set of stairs backwards. And why is that? It's the shoes. May I be so bold, right? And I'm not trying to stir things up between thens and nows. Yeah, nutrition is better. Yeah, physical care is better. I sure assume that like training tactics are better. But footwear innovation cannot be discounted or discredited when it comes to wear and tear on the body if miles are equal, right? So I don't want to go down the injury rate rabbit hole. That's a whole separate topic for you. But just isolating the advantages of midsole cushioning, why wouldn't you want that in everyday product? So when we start talking about PWRRUN HG, what is PWRRUN HG? It's a PIBA-based, super critically foamed, high resiliency midsole. Obviously, if you aren't a chemist, that means next to nothing.
That means, yeah.
So PIBA, PEBA, is the base thermoplastic elastomer resin that we build the foam out of. And I'm sure people are gaining familiarity with this at this point, right? Like polyether block amide or amide. And it's very lightweight, super strong, yet incredibly flexible, energetic material. Super critically foamed refers to the manufacturing process. And what we do, we have to take this hard, rigid starting form, and you have to make it a soft, pliable, finished part. And to do that, you saturate the PIBA compound with a supercritical fluid, which is a phase somewhere between gas and a liquid, right? 8th grade earth science taught you wrong. There are more than 3 phases. You do that inside an autoclave, so a pressure cooker or a vacuum oven. So you heat it, and then as pressure is induced, the part grows, right? And it draws in that supercritical gas. And then at vitrification, stabilization or solidifying, you left with this midsole that's very molecularly consistent. So micromolecularly consistent, actually. So like very, very small, tightly formed bubbles. And that combination is what gets, of PIBA and the SCF process, is what gets you this super high resilient foam. Now, where are we going
resilient.
next? Resilient.
Probably resilient, right?
I knew it. Yeah. So what's resiliency? Matt and David, you guys did an awesome whole episode on this, right? Like exploring that word. So I'm not going to belabor that point, but it's semantics, right? It's an adjective game, like pop, rebound, return, bounce,
responsiveness, things
get
like
up,
that. Yeah.
springiness, responsiveness. That's resiliency. So the way we test for it, and I went into this a little bit last time, we have an Instron machine. It's a tabletop piston that precisely measures the dynamic material properties. And we impact test the foam mechanically. So we load the material, and then we unload the material, and we look at the difference between the deformation, which we'll say absorption, and then the rebound, which we'll call that energy return. Right. So if you math out those two differences, you get energy efficiency of the foam, and that's the energy efficiency of PWRRUN HG is 95%. Now, I do want to clear up one thing. The difference between impacting the foam alone and then the finished shoe, when I say 95%, I'm talking about the foam. Because when you add in an upper and an outsole, if there's a plate, any of the shoe construction, that can change the outcome of this test. So it's also super important to remember that the foam efficiency and the shoe efficiency improvements, I would say, while correlated, do not ensure better human efficiency, which improvements, which is running economy, right? So I know in listening to previous episodes, like I think it's an important point to focus on.
Yeah. So, Matt, did you have something? You kind of had your hand
That was
up
a
for
lot.
second.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it's great. I think one of the key things that people might forget, because we like to think about things in isolation, but this is a system, just like human beings, right? You can't think about the shoe in isolation because you need to talk about the whole human being and how they as an individual react, not going, yeah, this shoe says X% improvement economy, is like, that might be totally different based on that unique individual, but also thinking about what are all the components of the shoe, be it outsole, midsole, insole, which I got to give credit because you have had a lot of shoes recently where you've really done some great work with the insoles, where the insoles used to be just pure, like that was kind of an afterthought. And now we're seeing some of the same materials you use in the midsole actually put into the insole as well. Because you're like, yeah, this is the first thing that people interact with when they land. And that actually makes a huge impact, we know from literature, on perception of the ride. So, which is also important to think about. That was me also going too long. I'm sorry.
So I have some questions too. So one, just to clarify too, just for those who may not have heard an episode on the idea of impact testing, you're basically saying that the compression of the foam from the impactor, let's say it went 100 millimeters, just that's never like what actually happens. Let's say it went 100 millimeters, maybe that is, I don't know. What their energy return for this shoe would be, it came back 95, and then there's 5 that did not come back, or is that not how that's quantified or how that's made sense of?
No, not quite. So compliance. So when we say compliance, we basically mean deformation, and this gets into the difference between elastic and viscoelastic materials and Young's law and stress strain curves, but I don't want to go down too much of a rabbit hole, but like stress strain curves are, they create a hysteresis. So if you load and then unload a material, all right, if you're listening, imagine a banana, okay? And the back side of the banana is loading, and then the belly side of the banana is unloading. The space between the loaded and unloaded values, so how skinny your banana is the amount of energy lost. So a skinny banana is very efficient. So if there's 5% in between the curves, that's 95% efficient. So then we start getting into dynamic compression set and what all that means, and we sort of fly off the backswing. But did that answer?
No, I think that's exactly what I was hoping to go into, because I think it's hard to conceptualize the idea of, if I compress the foam and it only comes back a certain amount, wouldn't it just flatten out after 20 steps? So it's not how much the foam is coming back, it's that hysteresis curve. So that, I think that's really, that's helpful. The other question I had in terms of development of PWRRUN HG, you said it has this 95% energy return. What does PWRRUN PB have, and how are they made differently that allows that to happen?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So I think we published PB at just under 90%, and PB is a supercritically foamed beaded polymer. So so you take the resin, you extrude it through a tube, and you create and then you chop it into little beads, and then those beads are supercritically foamed and then molded together. So you have this extra skin that you get from the beads. It's also I guess getting into one of the critiques on PB, critiques on HG is probably a good way to explain the difference.
Sure.
One of the critiques on HG is that it feels a little firm, and that has to do with the mechanics of the viscoelastic properties. This is probably going to sound like nonsense, but in polymer science, there's a big difference between hardness and stiffness. And I know that sounds ridiculous if you're just a layperson, but like hardness is the topical surface deformation measurement, so durometer, and there's a reason why you don't hear many of us talk about durometer anymore. It's almost irrelevant. It's more of a byproduct of these modern foams. I swear on my parents' ashes, like PB HG is soft. it's like a low 40s durometer. It is not a hard foam.
Yeah.
But however, I can understand, and I hear why some folks might find it stiff and perceive that as firm. So stiffness is the elastic deformation under load. So the inverse of stiffness is compliance. So I'll repeat that. The inverse of stiffness is compliance. So this really shoots us right into the nuance of human biomechanics and gait specifics and pace and frankly shoe design, geometry and construction. So when we play with the forces and contact time and energy efficiency, it can dramatically change the perception underfoot. So how people perceive stiffness or compliance is incredibly personal and probably worthy of a whole nother episode. But
sure.
but that's why we have separate compounds. If PWRRUN HG or the Elite geometry doesn't work for you individually, we have other options that should, like PB, which is more compliant. And you have to remember, in our positions as footwear manufacturers, it's easy to take our existing molds and put different materials into them and see what changes for the human. Like, that's how we test it. So
yeah. So then with and if I guess either of you can take these questions too, because I'm starting to dip into some of that stuff that you might see in the lab, Cory. So when you had this new foam, this HG, and maybe the first step you did is you put it in an existing mold that you already had or something, how did you end up with the geometry that you have? Because it is, from what we can perceive here, like a later stage rocker, a little bit more sharp angle here. How did you end up on the geometry that you did, and what were you seeing between kind of like the types of people who benefited from one or the other, or is that part of the testing process?
It's definitely part of the testing process. We did it a little differently. We backed into HG, not into PB, not out of PB. So we mechanically tested HG and found out how spectacular it was. So what we wanted to do was create a different ride profile. It's not just about using and leveraging an awesome foam. It's also about creating different rides and different experiences for different runners. The slotted plate is much more accommodating from landing lateral to moving through stance and excuse me, mid stance and out. So that provides a different ride characteristic than a solid plate in the Pro. The materials, obviously, as we just talked about, that's going to have a different perception underfoot. The aggressive toe spring is definitely not for everyone, I would say. I think some people love it. I sort of wish David was on the call.
I do too.
Yeah, Matt does too. Yeah. But some people feel like it's not in the right position. You're not on the right. It's right. Not on the correct cadence with you. I shouldn't use that word, but yeah.
Yep.
And Cory, please feel free to jump in on the testing side if you'd like.
Also, Cory, before you jump in, just to fill this in for David, you all created a shoe that he chose over the Alpha Fly, which we joked at him all the time. Like, that dude, like, literally, he would tell us on a Thursday, I'm going to race in X shoe. And then he's like, yeah, I just put the Alpha Fly in my bag just in case. And I laced him up, and he'll race in the Alpha Fly anyway. So the fact that he laced up that shoe for a marathon and he did PR in that race and all that stuff, he had a good day. Like, that does say something from like an experience for a guy like him, that is, and I haven't ran in the Alpha Fly, but from a compliance feeling standpoint, those have got to be very different underfoot experiences. Matt, you've ran in both, so we don't have to belabor that, but there's David's presence with us as him choosing this shoe for his marathon.
We were quite proud.
Yeah, that's cool.
I would like to go back for a quick second, because Andrea, I think you did a great job talking about the difference between why durometer really isn't frequently discussed versus something like compliance or stiffness. And it's kind of the same, the analogy I would use for that is why we talk about static, like posture versus active movement. We tell students and others going, yeah, sorry, like a lot of those static measurements that people take, be it foot scan or stuff like that, that really doesn't give you vital like product information about what the human being or even the product is going to do, versus the compliance or the stiffness actually looks at what is happening when you're loading this thing, which is much more functional, and things can vary completely. Durometer and compliance, i.e. stiffness, can be related. They can also be completely unrelated and not related. Just like static posture often doesn't relate to what you'll see with movement. It's a nice place to start to go, I wonder what's going to happen, but it's not the final picture. You have to look at things moving or under load, which is why some people want a thing that, because it's easier to measure durometer, right? You can push into the shoe, but you're not loading it. It's way harder to measure stiffness, right? That takes much more sophisticated machinery and things like that. But it's this exact same concept, I think, going, you got to look at this while people are moving under load because that's more functional.
Yeah, and at different paces too. You might love the shoe at a slow pace, but you might not love it at a fast pace, or vice versa. Well, yeah, more on that later.
It might even be worth just to differentiate for the listeners the difference between stiffness, meaning the essentially, if you imagine in your head the banana that Andrea already drew in your head a couple minutes ago, where essentially the slope at any point along that banana can be considered the stiffness, but it's probably worth differentiating between that and the actual amount of force it takes to bend the entire shoe. So one is a kind of shoe / geometry property, right? How much force does it take to bend? For the listeners, I just picked up a shoe and bent it lengthwise, versus the material property of the midsole itself. So actually, or the foam, generically any foam, where you apply a force to it and look at the amount it displaces, and the ratio essentially of how much it displaces for the amount of force you apply would be
some things get stiffer in that sense the faster you load them. Is that an accurate statement for some materials? Some materials. Yeah, not all. But.
So to be clear, to differentiate how your shoe bends, that the term is longitudinal bending stiffness versus the midsole stiffness is a different concept, and people need to be aware of that.
Right.
And I think
why
that's
we use compliance
a really
more
great
often.
distinction to bring up, Cory.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. Cool. So, Cory, are there any things when you've seen this tested in the lab in terms of preferences or biomechanics or running economy? What sort of things have you, just observations that you've made when testing this foam? And if there's certain specifics you can't go into, we get that. So, but
don't worry, my boss is on with me. So if I start to divulge too much, I'm sure she'll stop me.
Why did Cory's screen go blank all of a sudden?
We worked out hand signals before the call.
So testing, it's interesting. So certainly the Elite, it tests remarkably well in the lab for a variety of paces for a variety of our testers. Interestingly, it's not 100% of our testers test, quote unquote better, and I'll say better as in better running economy in the Elite relative to a handful of our other shoes. Including Pro 3 and even Speed 3. So it really is highly user dependent. But I will tell you, for a large percentage of people, running economy will be superior in the Elite relative to a variety of our similarly designed product.
Have there been any patterns that have emerged with that, within your product, or has it been too hard to nail down what those variables are?
That's a great question. I'm not sure I would still have a job if I nailed the pattern down exactly. There may be some inklings of trends, but I think we'll need closer to 8 billion data points than what we have now to really land on that.
And that's honestly super smart. Just as I'm processing your ability to answer that question, there's a lot more that you've observed. How smart it is to start talking about those things makes a difference, because we so I work help at a DPT program, and we talk about admissions, and we talk about how do we, do that well holistically and all this stuff, and finding the right amount of data points to make admissions decisions. If you start using just like, in last year's cohort, we noticed these things. If you've got 4 people that fall into a certain trend, that's not enough to make a decision that could, really change, a direction of a whole industry, or, in this case, individuals who want to become PTs. So there's wisdom in waiting until you have 800,000 data points, or at least enough to create some power in the decisions. So, okay, so it's funny, y'all listen to our podcast, which still cracks me up. But that means I can kind of reference back to a couple things from last time. But one of the questions that we did last week on the buy or sell episode was, should we get rid of EVA foam? And so, and throw, this PBA and all these supercritical PBA-based foams, should that be what we use for everyday stuff? When y'all think about PWRRUN HG and what you have with it, what do you envision doing with that foam? Do you see it replacing your, PWRRUN foam and getting rid of EVA? How do y'all as a team conceptualize that question?
Yeah, that was a fun one. No, we do not envision getting rid of EVA foams, partially because of what I mentioned before. EVA foams are pretty good. They might not be 95% efficient, but some of them can get pretty darn close. And a lot of that is because they're not pure EVA. There's other stuff in them, and the same manufacturing processes that you can leverage for PBAs and TPUs, you can also use in EVAs. So hard no. Hard no. I can't remember if buy is yes, or if it's buy a no. I would say you touched upon really good bullet points in answering those questions too. Cost is a big part of it. PBA is not inexpensive. Room-sized autoclaves are not the most efficient way of making foams. So there are a lot of reasons outside of the physical benefits of the foams to not discard the EVA or other materials. We're abandoning PUs for different reasons, but the other thing is if used in combination, which I actually think was an answer to a different buy-sell question further down the line. Yep. But the idea that if you can combine these materials and use them, spot target them, and construction-wise, it doesn't make sense to abandon something that is perfectly useful, especially at doing specific things. So that's my answer.
Cory, any other thoughts on it?
I don't disagree at all. I think you might have even mentioned this in the episode, but there's a sustainability story and also a price story for every single material. And some of that could be related to, how much carbon it takes to make the material or to run the factory that makes the material, but also could just be the durability of the shoe itself. If you have to throw it in a landfill after 100 miles versus 400 miles, then there's a big story there as well. So, we like to think of it in terms of just one or two key properties, but there are dozens of properties that go into, what makes the material or ultimately a product, right for the right context.
Yeah. And that makes me think of two questions actually really quick. One is, from a durability standpoint, when it comes to something like HG versus some of the EVAs that you have, is there a difference that y'all notice there? And what should we maybe expect from a foam like that to maintain those properties? And then the second one was, I guess I'll save the second one. That's a big enough question. Durability and HG.
Yeah. So it depends. And I know that's a horrible answer to the question. It depends on a lot of different things, right? Like it depends on you and your size and your gait characteristics and all of the things I know that you have discussed multiple times. But it also depends on how you make the foams. A bead foam is generally speaking more durable than a non-beaded foam. That's not always the case. TPUs are generally speaking more durable than PBAs, which are generally speaking more durable than EVAs. That's not always the case. It really depends on a lot of different things, but generally speaking, the number doesn't change for what we suggest you get out of your mileage per
So
shoe.
like mileage in the Elite will be similar to your mileage in a Ride 16 from a foam property standpoint. From what y'all
Correct.
are seeing.
I would say that there is a big difference in our beaded foams. They are far more durable.
So like your both types of beaded foams that you have, you see that.
Yes. And Cory, do you feel comfortable talking a little bit about PWRRUN Plus?
Only uncomfortable in that the results
take.
are so mind numbing to believe, but yeah, we've so in particular, Triumph 20/21 would have this midsole, so PWRRUN Plus, and I think Matt's even showing an example.
Yep.
Yeah, you reviewed it recently. So we're looking in particular at how to quantify how long this midsole will last and maintain its mechanical properties over a prolonged duration of running. So we're investigating a couple of different ways to mechanically impose the exact same amount of demand on the shoe over a prolonged period of time, and then measuring something about the mechanical properties before that test and then after that test, so we could quantify something about the decay. And maybe we assume it's linear or non-linear, but just to look at the difference. But we are struggling to find a test that's long enough and abusive enough to actually result in a decay in the midsole properties of PWRRUN
For
Plus.
the PWRRUN Plus.
Now, and I'm sure we have legal and marketing folks from Saucony that are sweating right now as I'm saying this, but hopefully it's vague and generic enough that's doesn't put us in any significant trouble. But yeah, it's a remarkably durable foam in that it will maintain its mechanical properties over a very high level of abuse.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
I'll say your outsole and your upper will fail before your midsole does.
In the PWRRUN Plus situation.
Yeah,
and
which is usually not the case, because it's usually the opposite. Not always, right? But sometimes usually the midsole will flatten out long before the upper with some people that can blow through the other ones quicker.
Wow.
So you're using right now, you're using the human test, right? So remind me, the device that you use and I should know this, the device that you have where you test the compound properties or the like compliance is you just keep that thing pounding into the midsole. That is called, please remind me, the impactor,
we use
or
Instron for impact testing. Yeah, we call it impact testing. Yeah.
Right. So you're using the variation on this test is the human component, that when the impactor's been on so long that all the Saucony employees start using their PTO, that okay, this clearly has.
It is really annoying machine to sit near.
Yeah, I know. I remember I was like, dun, 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 like, wow, does that ever get? You're like, yes, it gets. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a restaurant below that room that I'm sure hates us, but
yeah,
that's pretty cool.
Instead of leaving a bad Yelp review, you just leave that on for a couple days.
Exactly.
That's amazing. And we can't talk about it here, but there will be stuff coming from a sustainability side of stuff. I know it was previewed at the running event, so there's stuff out on it, but as it relates to this conversation. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what's coming out and how that goes. So I wanted to ask kind of just a follow-up question, and then we're going to segue into our second part, talking about the Kinvara Pro. But I want to ask, when it comes to HG, you're not selling out on EVA. That's going to stick around. Do you see taking the HG and using it in daily shoes, or do you think it's not really worth it for like a daily training shoe, or how do you perceive that, or that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think whether it's HG or PB, we have plans. HG has some unique properties about it in terms of manufacturing that is going to probably keep it price wise out of some of the everyday product. That's it's unreasonable at some perspective. But I guess to sort of answer that question, we get asked a lot, is too much energy return a bad thing? To which I always ask back, why would you want less? Why do you want less energy return? And if it's attenuation that you want, or the reduction of force, you can have that without compromising energy return, right? I mean, physics-wise, you can't be absorbing energy and returning it at the same time. Foam-wise, it can't be done. Cory and I were just talking about this on Friday. It's the second law of thermodynamics, right? Like if the foam isn't returning energy back to you, you are just losing it. It becomes heat. So, and that loss of material properties in running, it basically presents like running in sand. Well, at least the extreme does. So if we can't physically make a return over 100%, we can. That's the laws of physics. And it can't be, you can't unload without the human dictating when, right? It has to be post-stance phase, right? So it's literally on-demand energy return. And that sounds pretty good to me. Let's maximize it. So in terms of using it in everyday product, Saucony, we really focus on this term democratized innovation. If you're in our office for more than like a day, you're going to hear that phrase. We hammer it home because we don't want to stray from it, honestly. And I'll go on a slight tangent here, but like we make a lot of comparisons and metaphors around the automotive industry. I'm sure you guys have picked up on this over the years of talking to footwear people, but designers especially love a good car analogy. And maybe you've heard this one, but like everyone loves a race car, but we sell a lot more sedans, and that sometimes that holds true for even the teams working on the product. Like everybody strives to work on the flashy new concept car, but like the daily trainer is the biggest deal. It's the pièce de résistance, right? Like that's your meat and potatoes. So again, why wouldn't we want to put these amazing foams into everyday products that you can benefit the most from them? I guess maybe I think that the biggest adversary to super shoes. Oh, Matt, did you have a? Oh no,
go for it.
What was I saying? The biggest adversary to super shoes. Maybe it's the second biggest adversary to super shoes. Is that folks feel that they're unapproachable, right? Like that somehow they're not for everyone, and perhaps maybe that was true at first. There are a lot more options now, right? Like moreover, we have these lightweight, high responsive protective foams in everyday styles that are more accommodating with templates and more reasonable costs. So it's not just about running faster. It's about running more comfortably and reaching longer distances and extending your running career and having quicker and easier recoveries. So that's really what democratized innovation is. So whether it's HG or it's PB or it's these very boutique EVAs, if you call them, this is probably the best place to segue to product talk with Cory, because we have all of these great foams. So how do we, from scratch, design, engineer, test, and validate, like let's call it a super shoe or super construction for that everyday runner at everyday paces? And I think that's going to answer your question entirely, Nathan.
Totally. Matt, why don't you go and then I'll...
Yes. I will actually, Andrea, it's so interesting that you said that, because that is exactly what I was about to reference. And we talked about this when we went and visited all of you, going, yes, we know at that time, right, we were concerned that, maybe people shouldn't be training in these all the time, right? They're kind of tools, like to the race car analogy, right? You're going to want to take the race car to the racetrack. It might not be the most appropriate thing to take to the grocery store, right? That's where the sedan, that kind of stuff. I got to hand it to Nathan, though, who said this much better than I did. And I think our concern then was we didn't know how people were going to respond. We didn't know if they were going to, because it's such a drastically different thing than what was on the market then. He's like, that shift, I think, is what we're concerned about. Because if you just went into one of those shoes and that's what you trained in, yeah, if you get used to it, you're going to be fine. It's the shifts back and forth where your body's really not ready for that change that we start to see things that we're concerned about. But now that the industry, all that stuff has bled in, people are going to be more used to it. So I think there's less concern now because, like you said, we're seeing these boutique EVAs that are taking some of the same lessons learned. We're seeing some of these foams also in daily trainers. So at this point, it's like, I don't think there's as much concern just because now it's everywhere. Now that it's the norm, your bodies are going to be more used to it. And anybody coming in, that's going to be their experience, as opposed to you're going from some of the older stiff EVAs to a quote unquote super foam. Like that's a big shift, and going back and forth and not being ready for some of the things that might be required of you with that is going to be different now when they're actually getting more similar and you're seeing this. So it's okay to have a racy sedan now because that's what we've got. And you're seeing that even in the footwear industry where cars are adapting a lot of the race technology. Things are lighter. Things are way faster. Things are more streamlined, and you're seeing that. And I think footwear is not any different.
I think go ahead, Andrea.
No. I was going to say that the car to footwear analogies are deep. They run deep.
Yeah. I was going to say maybe we should take Matt's description of a racy sedan and reframe it, because I think you're saying like a fast. Like
I meant sorry.
I was just going to tease
sedan.
You. Yeah,
not wherever that was going. That's a different industry, I think.
That's great, but I do think
get cut out.
I think this might be the first time that I've heard a cat come on the show. So if anyone's hearing the cat, I think it snuck into Matt's room, which is amazing. But
the cats are fighting right now with because one of them opened the door, and I am dealing with the consequences of that. So I apologize.
Amazing. But this is a perfect time to segue. We do want to also spend some time talking about the shoe that's coming, the Kinvara Pro. And curious to talk to you all about the development of this shoe, because for something called Kinvara, it feels like it couldn't be any different than the Kinvara. So can we first just start kind of with the story behind like where this shoe came from and the idea came from, and why is it called Kinvara Pro? But why does it have Kinvara in it?
It's a great question, and I think a question that will be asked a lot, and hopefully I can point them to this episode in the future. So I hope if I say it once and it's really great, then it'll be the last time. But I think the story honestly starts back in, call it 2009, 2010. It's when I started grad school. So I just graduated from the College of New Jersey, and I was moving on to Penn State to study biomechanics. And it was a really exciting time to be in biomechanics research for a couple of different reasons. And one was because of maybe two different publications that came out right around the same time. One is Born to Run, and if any of the listeners haven't had a chance to read it, it's an interesting read. And also a publication in this little academic journal called Nature by Dan Lieberman and foot strike patterns and collision forces in habitually shod and barefoot runners. So between those two, it was maybe not the first time, but at least the first time in my academic life that biomechanics had become kind of popular, and people it had permeated through academia and into kind of popular culture in a lot of ways. And it was an interesting time for me because that's around the time where I really started to get into running, and it was pretty much the reason that I'm here today is because of the original Saucony Kinvara, and it was a perfect example of what Andrea just mentioned, democratized innovation. So it was right around this time, everyone's starting to think, okay, we need barefoot running and barefoot shoes, which is a paradox, right? But this is when these super minimal, super lightweight, very flexible shoes started coming out, 0 heel-toe offset, 0 millimeter heel-to-toe offset. And these were just everyone was scrambling to make the best barefoot shoe, in quotes, possible. And at the time, Saucony thought, well, and I'm saying Saucony as a third party because I wasn't in the company at the time, unfortunately. But so the focus was, well, how do we take this very popular trend and make it borrow aspects from this trend and from this research to make a shoe that's more accessible to everyone. So what you see in the Kinvara, the original Kinvara, it's a low stack, but it's not almost nothing stack. It's 4 millimeter heel to toe offset. It's not 0 millimeter. It's lightweight, but it's not a coating of paint on the bottom of your foot. And it basically took some bits and pieces of what designers were starting to think about in the barefoot running trend, but made it more accessible so more people could. It was the gateway drug essentially into minimalism, for lack of a better term. So in my mind, it always became, the Kinvara, the idea of the Kinvara was always this kind of emphasis toward making something that's taking a popular trend and democratizing it and making it more accessible for more people. So hopefully you start to see where the path I'm traveling
and
down.
enter in Kinvara Pro.
Right.
So tell us, I guess, in that vein. So then, what is this all stealing from? I could probably take stabs at it, but we have you here to
of course, yeah. So fast forward. so fast forward maybe 10 years or so. Minimalism is gone. Maybe not gone, but minimalism is a very minimal thought in a lot of people's minds. And the original 4% Vaporfly comes out. Now this has exploded, and every footwear manufacturer is making what we're calling a quote unquote super shoe, right? So a highly resilient, highly compliant, low density foam, usually but not exclusively with a plate, often carbon fiber plate, and this has been a really huge trend of the past 4 or 5 years, and you might be thinking in your mind, well, wait a second, didn't Saucony already try? Didn't we already try to make a everyday, or a more accessible carbon fiber super shoe? And the answer is yes. It was the Endorphin Speed, right? Which became one of the most popular shoes. I don't know if I could say ever, but it's an extremely popular shoe that tested well, sold well, and it worked well for a large number of people in a large number of situations. Now, I'm saying a large number because I know Nate, I believe you might have not loved the Speed 1/2. And correct. I believe the answer was related to stability. And I think that might have been, if there was a complaint, which was very infrequent, probably was related to stability. So I think we've addressed a lot of that in the Speed 3. But we tried to say... This is funny.
Now you make me happy now that you did it for me. And then some people are like, I missed the 1 and the 2. It felt... Yeah, thank you.
But we, around maybe 2-3 years ago, we started to think, well, if we started from scratch and said, how would we make a plated super foam style super shoe for the everyday runner at everyday training paces? How would we go about tackling that design challenge? And that's kind of the impetus behind the name and the kind of story around the Kinvara Pro.
That makes a lot of sense from a linkage between the two names because, like I said, you look at the shoes and they're so different. You have huge stack, you have stiffness, you have a plate, you have like all the things. Whereas the other one, like you said, was so minimalist, but it was more of the origin story of the shoe versus the actual structure. I mean, the outsole is kind of similar. I would say maybe that's, you guys, you'll kept that kind of, ribbed EVA exposed outsole, but that's... Yeah,
I have 50 miles on this shoe right here. Yeah. I have 50 miles. I have created definitely my own poster-level heel bevel. No, it's doing fine. It's doing great.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about, because this is one of those, we actually talked about this topic last week too. So, or I guess it won't be last week whatever, the buy sell episode that we released. So
Right.
This is one of those that has a really high stack height, 42 millimeters in the heel and 34 in the forefoot. So it's going above that 40 millimeter mark. You talk about you wanted to start from scratch and develop a shoe. How did you actually go about tackling that question, and what sort of like testing did you go through to create the shoe that you did? And maybe you can give me the evidence that I want to buy the idea of a more than 40 millimeter. Not that I'm super hard sell on it, but I'm just like, hey, show me it's worth it. So I'd love to hear about your development process for the Kinvara Pro.
Yeah, that's about, I think, 30 minutes worth of answering on that question. But but I love it because I'm planning on talking about all of that anyway. So just stop me when you've heard me speak enough and break it up. But so what are the design characteristics that we're thinking about when starting from scratch? You mentioned the stack heights. And in particular, the 8 millimeter offset. Given the fact that it has, but I should have mentioned, PWRRUN PB directly underfoot, and it has a chassis or a carrier of PWRRUN underneath the plate, or essentially along the bottom of the shoe. So those materials, in particular PWRRUN PB, being so compliant, the 8 millimeter kind of just static measurement of offset really ends up feeling a lot closer to a 4 millimeter offset, just due to the fact that it's such a highly compliant material. I should be better about saying a static offset versus dynamic offset. So that's one particular design feature. One is a perfect example why I don't think EVA is going to go away anytime soon. And you see a similar idea in the Tempest, in that we can take the differences in the mechanical properties of these different foams and use them to our advantage. So in particular with the Kinvara Pro, the wide template, so essentially the outline of the bottom of the shoe, along with the slightly less compliant and a little bit heavier and higher density, I should say, PWRRUN on the bottom, those two things kind of combine to create kind of a more stable platform, which for either a fast runner running slow or for a slower runner just running at their typical pace, it's going to provide a shoe that should have a very stable ride. And what I did mention between these two great midsoles, or these two great foams, is a carbon fiber plate. And this is a 3/4 length, essentially 3/4 of the length of the shoe. Yep. So for those of you just listening, Nate's holding it up. And what that essentially means is that there's no carbon fiber plate directly under where initial contact would occur, meaning for most cases heel strike. So what that's ensuring is that it's going to be really, really soft on initial contact, but you still get essentially midfoot through toe off all the benefits that you would expect and the ride and sensation that you would get from a typical plated shoe.
Cool. And so you have the combination of these two foams, a plate, stack height. What led you to making those decisions of how much to put in of each? And how, did you talk about different speeds of stuff? Like how did you land on, was your decision for the amount of foams dependent on what the testing showed you with the different speed testing, or what did that look like?
Usually they're running in combination or in parallel. Where you'll be kind of testing as changes are made and then make changes and then go back and test. So it's never just sit and wait for a result. Usually you're trying to get information as early as possible to move along in parallel. But usually the one of the bigger compromises is you pay a penalty in terms of weight. So you can make a more protective or a more supportive shoe, but you pay that penalty, usually in terms of, now you're carrying more stuff on your foot. And usually that just is a penalty in terms of weight. So that will have some repercussions or not, depending on the design of the shoe. And we see that in kind of the testing that we did. the products that we'll talk about very briefly.
Great. Matt, do you have any questions on that part so far?
Yeah, I have one bubbling in my mind, but I'm not sure if it's totally on topic. It relates a little bit. Should I go for it?
Let it fly. Let it fly.
Yeah, I guess my question is, because we're seeing a couple shoes like this, it's just starting to come out, but the combination of two foams where you've got usually more, I guess not traditional, we got these now special EVA foams combined with some of these, what we would call super foams, right? As mentioned. Is there a term for how the foams interact with each other? Does that make sense? Because there's different properties, I'm assuming, I might be totally off. If you had a full slab of PWRRUN PV versus a full slab of PWRRUN, right? So, but you've seen, and then obviously I can understand, my assumption is you put, like Cory mentioned this, you put the PWRRUN on the bottom because it provides a more stable foundation, right? It's inherently like stiffer foam, right? But they're gonna react very differently to that amount of foam with those two versus one of just each, correct? Is there a term for how they interact? Has anybody looked at that, or is it just kind of, this is not important?
I would definitely not say it's not important, but I don't think anyone's coined a term for it yet. You should do that. We'll use it and make sure to footnote you.
Okay, got it.
I mean, we can talk about it from the compliance and stiffness perspectives of each foam and what we look at, but I don't think that there's a term for it to answer that question.
I feel like it'd be like shared compliance or like co-compliance would be just the easier way to do it, because that's what I'm seeing these shoes and going, oh, that's interesting. These have a place, but I don't know how to explain how they might be interacting and what changed with it. It feels great, right? It's a very unique ride. It's different than either one of the full ones. I just, I'm just curious if anybody's coined that. And I'm sure that you're seeing that based on what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I think in terms of mechanical, in terms of testing, our impact tester doesn't really care what's underneath it. So we can quantify the total effect of everything that's underneath the endpoint as load and displacements are being measured. But it would, we'd have to think about how we actually stack up the individual components' contribution to that final force displacement, banana.
Yeah.
So are we agreeing that we're going to call this co-compliance, or do you want this shared compliance? I feel like this needs to be a group decision, so we're talking about this.
Co-compliance works. I like it. You heard it here first, folks.
This was a joint decision.
Entirely. I would say that co-compliance is most important under human. To Cory's point, looking at it mechanically, you can get results, but it's not the full picture.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think maybe on person, like on human testing, kind of a question I have in relating to the design of the shoe and kind of some of the things you've referenced about like democratized innovation. In the testing that you did to develop this shoe, who did you find that it really benefits? Like, when is it and what does benefit mean in the case of the Kinvara Pro? I think those are my two questions. Who does it benefit, and what does benefit mean based on the testing that you've done in your lab on person?
What a wonderful question. That's
you didn't even really feed me that one. I came up with that on my own.
For teeing that up, Nathan.
I'll talk a little bit about the specific testing that we did. And then I'll give you my conclusions that will answer the first part of that based on the data that we captured. So what we did is we quantified running economy. So just for a throwback to episode 96, we look at with a measurement device called the metabolic cart. We quantify oxygen consumption and carbon dioxide production. The ratio of those is called the respiratory exchange ratio. That feeds into a formula that can predict the amount of energy expended by, in this case, the runner, while they're engaged in a particular activity. So we quantified running economy during two different speeds in two different shoes for a cohort of different athletes. And I say athletes, what I really mean is just individuals, not necessarily our elite athletes or our professional athletes.
Yep.
Excuse me. So we had all of our testers come in for 2 different testing sessions on different days, and we had them run in 2 different speeds, one of which I'll call comfortably hard. So it's not beyond your threshold pace, but just a little bit slower than that. Not for that being a very important threshold beyond which it's difficult to quantify the amount of energy that a runner is consuming, because it's steadily climbing because you're kind of beyond your anaerobic threshold. And also we had those same runners run in a speed, what I would like to call just your cruising pace, or you might call it recovery pace for someone post workout, the day after a workout maybe, or for a newer runner it might just be their pace that they run at all the time. So it's kind of the comfortable cruising pace, and then this pretty hard but not beyond your pace. And we had all of our testers run in the Endorphin Pro 3 and in the Kinvara Pro, and they did that, and they counterbalanced, or we alternated which shoe was first and which speed was first across the days and across all of our testers. And just for a frame of reference to put this particular cohort, just to put it in context, the average speed for our faster pace of the 2 was a little over 7 minutes per mile, and the average easier, or kind of closer to recovery pace for this cohort was just a little bit faster than 9 minutes per mile. So enough to give
between that 7 and 9.
Yep.
Yeah.
So they were either at that closer to 9 or closer to 7. And again, every person was different. And I think that's a unique characteristic of this particular experiment that is maybe more interesting to us as a footwear manufacturer than necessarily what a research institution in academia might do, because what we're looking for is a pace that's unique to that individual. Mm-hmm. So rather than trying to find whatever your power analysis said, 18 testers that can all run faster than 6 minutes per mile, and they can do it in 3 different shoes on 2 different days, and they don't drop out of the study halfway through, and they're not in a competitive racing season. It becomes pretty difficult. I think I see Matt thinking about his experimental methods right now for his
power
PhD.
Analysis is power analysis is a trigger phrase for me right now, just FYI.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
So for that, we did that for a very particular reason. We wanted to make sure that it was applicable to a wide range of individuals. So what we wanted to do is not call easy pace a number, but we called easy pace a feeling, and that feeling is unique and specific to every single tester that came through.
Holla. That's great. Also, these people are me. You're just the people you brought in are me right now. So this is great. Keep talking. I want to hear it.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Another
thing.
Some are even slower. No. Self-selected is so important.
Yes.
That's good to hear that from a consistency standpoint. Not to bring up my traumas in the PhD, but that's one of the challenges you run into is, okay, so this is individual. How do you standardize that? And the fact that we can actually standardize an effort level of our feeling is great, because we finally have that answer, because we know that pace will vary incredibly. So the next follow-up is, okay, how do we standardize this to make that more consistent so we know the data that we're getting is actually reliable or valid? So it's great.
And another thing that we didn't specifically do, excuse me, that a lot of researchers do in this kind of realm is we did not control for the weight of the shoe. And we do that because, the weight of the shoe is in and of itself a design characteristic of the shoe that we are interested in testing. As I mentioned earlier, I think in a specific response to one of Nate's questions, we are adding more foam for a more supportive, more protective, more stable environment, but we're paying that penalty in terms of added weight. And we can cite a couple of different papers over the years that have attempted to quantify the penalty that you pay in terms of added energy expenditure per unit amount of weight added to the shoe. And it's usually around 1% for every 100 grams of dead weight, I'll say, because we know that not all weight is created equal. So what we really wanted to do is quantify, in part, how much penalty are we paying for, if at all, are we paying for this added weight and more supportive environment?
Yeah,
Right.
that word dead weight is worth repeating, because it's it's not part of the design if you're just adding it in lead pellets on the back of the shoe, but it is built in.
And for this scenario too, the question that someone like me, if I was going to come buy a shoe, I would want to know, do I do better in that shoe as it is? For like, if I was going to come into a Saucony store, let's just keep everyone else out of it. But if I was going to come to a Saucony store, I'd want to know which shoe is going to be the best for me. Not, is this shoe better for me, as long as the weight is equal. So I do like, especially for the development side on your end, like that's a big benefit of the way of developing a shoe. You can see what it is for what it actually is, instead of equalizing some stuff. And those both have values in different ways, but that's actually super helpful to hear. Cool. So what did you find?
So drum roll. No. So what we found at the faster pace, so again, faster pace is specific to each individual. It averaged out to around 7 minutes per mile, but some people were faster, some people were slower, but it was still fast for them. What we found was that the Endorphin Pro 3 was 2.4% more economical than the Kinvara Pro, which whether or not that's surprising to you will kind of depend on your background and your experience, but it's a shoe that's designed to go fast, and it's your running economy is reduced, or your running economy has improved when you're running in the Endorphin Pro 3 relative to the Kinvara Pro. But what's interesting, dare I say fascinating, about our experiment is at the easy pace. So the approaching 9 minutes per mile on average for our cohort, there's no statistically significant difference in running economy between the Endorphin Pro 3 and the Kinvara Pro. Mm-hmm. The Kinvara Pro is a full 2 ounces heavier than the Endorphin Pro 3.
Yeah.
So we could talk about why that might be, but it's a very interesting finding, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I'm curious too, before they even go into their thoughts from it. For you, Matt, hearing that, kind of just what's your reaction to that and your thoughts about what that means, and then they can tell us why we're wrong.
I think it actually validates it validates and opens. How do I say this? It validates something that I think we were thinking about, but also brings in a whole new piece. And I think the concept is understanding that shoes really are tuned to different paces, right? In terms of how things are. It's kind of one of the things we've kind of cautioned people with. Hey, should I be training in this super racing shoe? I was like, yeah, I get this point. You could. I don't think it may not be the best option for you at easy training paces. It's designed and meant to go at a faster effort, right? It's like, again, the same analogy with the race car, right? Could you take it to the grocery store? Sure. Is that really the most efficient thing? I don't know about that, versus knowing, hey, the benefit that you're going to get from a racing shoe compared to this, what do we want to call this? Not a hybrid, right? What would you,
what is the Kinvara Pro?
Everyday plated?
Yeah, sure. Everyday plated, this combination, right? To know that they actually aren't different at easy paces might make you go, well, what might be the better option, right? In terms of this one's going to be a little bit more stable. It's actually designed for training, but still has those characteristics that make it a great shoe. That's really, I've got 50 miles in my pair. It's comfortable. It works well. I've used it for easy runs, done some workouts in it, but long runs. It's a great shoe. It for me personally wouldn't be the thing I would choose for race day. I would choose the Pro 3, but for training, it's really comfortable, and it responds really well. So it makes sense to me, because I think we've seen that in the evidence. in terms of some smaller studies at the moment where we've gone, hey, the benefit for some of the super shoes decreases as you start going at slower speeds, right? And we quantified that first for some of those studies as slower runners, right? Or runners that run at maybe potential 8, 9, 10, whatever. But to know that, hey, we can actually design shoes that still give you some benefit over a traditional shoe, but maybe are tuned a little bit better for you, makes sense. And I think that I thought about it more as the runner's speed, not how is the shoe responding to them, which I think is the more important question. And probably, I guess, I don't know, vice versa. Did that make sense?
Totally.
Yeah. I think one of the quick reactions I have, and then I want to hear y'all have thought about, you've had this data for a long time, so you've sat and you've thought about it and you've ruminated over it. I think one of the things for me is even a conversation that we had with Jeff about like, why not train in these things all the time? And I think that does also, in these things, referencing a super shoe that has all only PBA based foam because it's the most, energy returning type material. And so if you take a shoe that isn't necessarily that, and you have a similar running economy at a slower pace, that kind of brings that whole conversation back into the fold and thinking about like, yeah, you don't necessarily need to be training in that to get as much running economy benefit in a shoe like that compared to something else. But tell us what y'all have thought about. Curious. I also think about race day for a lot of people too, but that's a whole other part.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you both have made a lot of comments that I think are pretty consistent with how we think about it, including some verbiage that's almost verbatim taken from write-ups from the past couple of months. I think maybe I would follow up those comments with addressing literally the first question you asked me about the Kinvara Pro, which is, I believe it was the first. I don't know. I'm trying to remember now, but who is it good for?
Yep.
Right. And I think based on the evidence that we have now, granted, running economy is not the only thing that matters. There are a lot of other characteristics that may dictate when a shoe should or should not be best suited for a particular context. But in my mind, what the data here are saying is that the Kinvara Pro is kind of tuned especially for this easy/recovery pace. So what does that make it for? Well, in my mind, it makes it for any context in which slower running may be preferred. So that could be for those new to running that are trying to avoid an overuse injury but not overdoing it. It could be higher volume runners who just need an option for their easy days. It could be first-time marathoners, or for anyone for whom there's no difference between your race pace and the kind of your everyday pace, or the pace at which you run at almost all the time. Or for anyone that's looking for just a product that they're willing to sacrifice a little bit on speed for just a more supportive, protective environment, or for, dare I say, a more stable ride. So really, it's not for slow runners. It's not for fast runners. It's not for elite runners. It's for potentially everyone, depending on the right context. Right. So as Matt says, it's a tool. It's the right tool for the right context.
In thinking about what you said in terms of your testing protocol, you didn't test based on speed. You tested based on effort. And I think that was where my conclusions for myself would come in. Like, when would I, based on that, if I were one of the subjects in your study that showed that ratio of benefit, then I would be using this again for maybe my long runs that I'm just out there just to get mileage in, and that easy pace runs. And then even, one of the things I want to do this year is I don't want to race a marathon anytime soon, to be honest, because that's just a lot of work. But I do want to run. We have a 24-mile trail around Stevens Point, and I want to maybe this fall, maybe next spring, depending on how I'm doing. But I want to just run the whole thing with no regard to running fast. And like, this makes me think, maybe that would be the shoe I'd pull out to do that in. Just because that would be what you were talking about, where it's not a hard effort, but it is a long distance, and it's just wanting to remain as economical as possible at that easier pace. So, and I was thinking about the people who want to just go run a marathon and not necessarily race a marathon. That's where it was sitting for me too. So Any other thoughts, Matt, from you?
Yeah, that answered it.
Great.
It's $180.
$180. Yeah, we didn't even talk about price.
No, why would we? We don't care about it.
Yeah.
We design product, not the price point. But it does fall into the conversations we had prior about. Well, you had prior. We weren't involved with them, though it feels like we were.
You're involved in spirit. We always have you on.
There you go. It falls into the commentary around, who are these shoes for? Well, not everyone wants or needs a shoe north of $200. That's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
So that goes into accessibility, right? So you hear of terms like sustainability, speed, performance, all this stuff, but accessibility is also something really, really important, especially in today's market. So that makes sense, right? Why, if you can get something that's really tuned to where you are as a runner or what your need is, again, using the car analogy, do you really need to go, like, again, if you're racing, great, awesome, that the race car makes sense, right? But you're probably still not going to take the race car to the grocery store. If you're the person that your daily run is the grocery store analogy, right, which is incredibly important, right? We need food, right? We need those base miles. We need that stuff. You can find something that fits that really well at a different price point, and it's actually tuned specifically for that activity. That's something why would you not choose that, right? Shoes are tools. It makes sense. Unless, you could still run easy in the Pro 3, but there's going to be a tool that's going, hey, we designed it specifically for this. And it's accessible.
This might be our last question on this shoe. Thank you for sharing all of it's fun to get a behind the scenes look, I think, for us and for the people who listen to this, just to hear how did a shoe get developed. I think that sometimes we try to, I know us too, we try to make guesses as to what were they trying to do here. Even with the relationships we have with y'all and the other companies, we don't always know the story and from y'all the science side of the story. How are you looking at people's perceptions of a shoe, and how are you looking at the science and the running economy, all that. So it's fun to hear that. That said, another buy or sell thing we talked about last week was training in plated shoes. Here we have a kind of a shoe designed for daily training. What are y'all's perspective on always training in a plated shoe? And both maybe speaking from a Saucony philosophy, but also y'all, like where are you at in that conversation? And then we're already 20 minutes over what we try to do, so we can wrap it up after that. But
it was totally worth it to me, but that's just me.
It is for me too.
I am learning so much, which is always awesome, which is normal to have when Andrea and Cory are on. But
so yeah, what's your perspective there?
Go ahead, Cory.
Yeah, I'll answer for the both of us. I believe I can say that pretty confidently. Yeah, I think we almost intentionally didn't answer it. We don't prescribe. What we try to do is to design and test and understand these mechanical tools that we're producing, but we leave it to people like you, to everyone, to the coaches, to the athletes, to the clinicians, to make that decision for themselves. If you choose to do so, we believe we've created a great solution for that, but we don't make specific prescriptions. I think that's a diplomatic way of putting it. Anything you'd want to add, Andrea?
No, that was the perfect diplomatic answer. Well, true, entirely true. I do think that we have this question and this commentary in the office all the time. People ask us all the time, and nobody is really happy with that answer. But at the same time,
unfortunately,
we are very much like you all. We want to wait and see and have better answers in pocket, and have better research in pocket. I will say, at first, I'll be really honest with you and the listeners. I wasn't a big fan of it. I think you should be cautiously optimistic and figure out what's going on before you just dive into all your miles with a plated shoe. And I've been coming around more to the idea of it, just purely anecdotally. But yeah, going back to the diplomatic answer, we don't have a perspective on it.
Do you think from a practical side of Saucony future development, will like the Ride, the Triumph, are those all going to become plated shoes? Is that like the philosophy, or is you're always going to have non-plated options with Saucony? Yeah, always and never are hard words. I get that, but
yeah, we never speak in absolutes.
Yeah.
I would very much bet the farm on the answer be no there.
Yeah.
We make different rides, and plates are a big part of rides. Not the shoe ride, obviously. And just much like the EVA question, you need to have different flavors for different folks. Matt?
I think that's the best way of putting that, because I totally with you. And we actually had this conversation where we were like, I don't know if people should be training. And now we have tons of great training shoes and shoes that people train in all the time, like the Speed 3. It has a nylon plate, but people still love training in that shoe, right? But at the same time, I think people need to understand what the purpose of a plate is, and that is to add longitudinal bending stiffness, to make modifications to the ride of the shoe. And I think there are some people that just need an inherently more stiff, be it stiff compliant, stiff longitudinal bending stiffness wise. That's not any different from adding an orthotic into a shoe or adding a post or adding. It's just another way of doing that. So I think some people are going to need it. Some people are not. And it goes back to what our students hate. And I was laughing earlier when you said this, is it depends on the person, right? There's no straight answer. There are going to be people who, actually they probably need a plated shoe for their daily miles. It just works for them. And there's going to be other people that go, you shouldn't run in a plated shoe because it doesn't work for you. But we can't make absolutes, because that takes away how individual people are. So yeah, that makes sense. It's not about we're going to put plate in every shoe or take it out. It's how do we make tools, or like as you mentioned earlier, how do we create solutions for problems? And that doesn't mean that you apply the solution to all the problems. It just means that that solution works for one, maybe two problems, I think is the kind of what I would add, but basically you just said.
And that's great, because I asked that question because people, including myself, like see a design choice within a company. I'm like, is this the direction they're going? And so I wanted to give you the space to kind of, I didn't know exactly what your answer would be. I figured I knew what it would be, but just being able to say, no, this is one solution to one potential problem, as Matt was just saying. I think the other interesting
you guys
thing...
know us well enough by now.
It's true.
I'd be shocked if you thought that my answer would be, yes, we're putting plates on everything.
Surprise! No, just kidding.
I think two other quick things. Our full review is going to come out on this shoe at some point, where people get all of our thoughts from our actual testing, so I don't want to go into that now. But I do think it's worth saying kind of a couple things. One, this is a shoe with a plate. It doesn't mean that it's faster because it has a plate in it. Plates aren't, again, as Matt just said, that's not what plates do. Only that's like maybe a small fraction of what they contribute to, but it's all within a big soup. The second thing is that just because this shoe isn't as economically friendly at faster paces as the Endorphin Pro 3 doesn't mean you can't run a little bit faster. And I've done workouts in this shoe, and I have liked it because my warm-up is really nice and easy, and it feels good. And then it does pick up just fine for those faster things, but just because it doesn't have the same running economy benefit as a super shoe doesn't mean you can't do workouts in it. But that'll come out in our review as well over time. But figured it might be worth throwing that out there.
No, I appreciated that. I think that goes back to what I was trying to say before about super shoes not being approachable. I think that's a misconception. I think that we need to add more words in there, much like Matt is coining terms and phrases for testing. I think we need to create some more categories, because I think people think super shoe and they think marathon racing shoe for only the hyper elite, and that's just not it. Thousands and thousands of people run marathons every year, and they're not all running them at sub 5 minute mile. So we just need to provide more product. So
yeah.
And I would add that you all think about the product too. We can do that.
We'll do that. Yes.
I would like to add that even though like this is the first time in history that people have been super interested in racing flats, and you have people that are running 5-hour marathons, running them in Endorphin Pro 3s and Elites and things like that. And so what I hope, and I'm kind of regretting right now, and this is part of the learning experience, is going, did we create fear in people going, oh, you're not running this pace, maybe you should rethink, what your shoe choice is? And that was not the intention. It was concern about not understanding what is going on. So I think that is a great way of putting it. There's more words that need to be added into there. Is that if you are a 5-hour marathoner and you love the Endorphin Elite and it feels great for you, go for it, right? That we don't want to do this. It's just asking the question, like, if you also keep in the back of your mind going, hey, this is a tool. How is there any variation of how I might respond to this versus something else, right? Would a Kinvara Pro be better for me? Or does the Endorphin Elite feel great? And this is my choice for marathon race day. Or am I finding that the Kinvara Pro is more comfortable, right? It's as you mentioned, creating solutions for problems and making products that actually match those solutions so people can have options to go, you know what? I feel okay. Like I know at my pace, these are both going to do great. And right now, this one's feeling a little bit better. I'm going to be that more confident when I do this race tomorrow. And because that's the ultimate thing, right? Is making people confident, making them enjoy this, right? So that makes
entirely
total sense.
The 2021 Boston Marathon, the person that came in last before they closed the clock was in a pair of super shoes. Now you can glean a lot from from that data point, but it folds right into what you were saying, Matt, in terms of, okay, well, whether they were in the shoes because they wanted to be faster or whether they just wanted to feel faster or whatever the reason was for them picking that shoe choice, we should be able to offer them responsible perspectives to the product. So.
Fantastic.
I'm just paraphrasing things that I'm learning from all of you. So
awesome.
I don't believe that at all. We're going to hire you after this. No, I'm kidding.
Well, Andrea and Cory, thanks so much for giving us all this time to talk about what does HG stand for? Sorry.
Oh my gosh, I should have answered that. That is, I almost don't want to set the record straight on this. It's been so fun to listen to it. No, I'll be honest. It stands for high grade.
High grade.
High grade. Yeah, and I know I've read that. I will also admit, internally we have alluded to it being a holy grail material, but that's not an official marketing name. That's not.
That's
true.
What BJ has said before. Our audio guy. Yeah,
you can find it in chats and stuff. It's pretty funny. That's why I didn't want to set it straight. There's also I've even heard someone say it stood for Mercury, which is super creative, right? Like going.
I was wondering if that was
right. SCF gases and like wings.
What am I putting on my foot?
That's pretty awesome. That's smart. I wish I'd come up with that. But then PWRRUN PB probably wouldn't play well into that though for a lightweight foam.
Yeah.
There's a peanut butter base to no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. HG stands
high
for high grade. Sorry,
high
everyone.
Grade.
Hate to let you all down.
No, it's good. We can still call it Holy Grail. So
Absolutely.
Again, thanks for talking to us about the development of that foam, kind of where you see it fitting in, what are some of the fallbacks and kind of the differences between these foams and how they can be used. And then obviously talking about at the end here, the Kinvara Pro. So again, thanks for giving us your Sunday night. If you want to follow, is there someone people should follow follow y'all? Are y'all social people where you put on stuff about this or not so much?
I don't have a very robust
no
internet footprint. No, I'm on LinkedIn. I probably have the world's lamest Instagram page. You can find me at Skidmore because I went to Skidmore.
I love it. That's great.
Yeah, you can
That's
find me.
Probably why
LinkedIn.
we get along with
That's
you.
about it.
Great, LinkedIn. Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us. And as with Doctors of Running, our review for the Kinvara Pro is going to be coming out. So you'll be able to find that on our website and everything else. As is always the case, you can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn as well at Doctors of Running. Thanks, everybody.